Russian officials have declared a state of emergency as a days-long inferno continues to rage at an oil depot near a nuclear base. Both sides in the war in Ukraine are fighting hell for leather to try and gain an advantage in the last days before Donald Trump's inauguration. Kharkiv again. My name is Jerome Starkey. I'm the defence editor at The Sun newspaper, and this is Frontline, your weekly roundup of the most important news from the war in Ukraine. We're starting today with the assault in Engels. A Ukrainian drone strike has hit a major oil depot which has been burning for more than 24 hours, some 450 miles inside Russian territory. Now, this is significant because this depot supplies the nearby Engels Air Base, which is home to a number of strategic bombing aircraft, including the Tupolev Bear aircraft. These are nuclear-capable long-range bombers. The local governor has declared a state of emergency. Initial reports, Russia tried to downplay the scale of this attack. We understand at least 40 explosions were heard. Not clear if all of those were drones or if they were secondary explosions as stored fuel exploded. Now, this is part of a long-running Ukrainian campaign to degrade Russia's oil, both its storage facilities, its depots, and its refinery infrastructure. A very detailed analysis by the BBC recorded at least 81 strikes against Russian oil infrastructure during the course of 2024. And separate analysis by the Reuters news agency has suggested that that degraded or also knocked out around 12% of Russia's refining capacity. Over the course of last year, that led to perhaps a 10% increase in fuel prices at the pumps for ordinary Russians. And there was also restrictions on fuel exports placed, ordered by the Kremlin to try and, keep hold of that precious resource, both for Russia's armed forces and indeed for ordinary Russians, to try and shield them from the effects of this conflict. Now, why has Ukraine been doing this? In order to try and starve Russia's armed forces of fuel, which they clearly need to prosecute this war in Ukraine, but also to try and bring the conflict home to ordinary Russians who in many ways are shielded from the horrors, the slaughter, the carnage and the scale of the devastation that is unfolding in Ukraine. Partway through last year, there were suggestions reported in the Financial Times. Actually, America was unhappy and tried to rein in Ukrainian attacks on Russian oil infrastructure because America feared it might lead to a global spike in oil prices, which would not have been helpful for Joe Biden as he was seeking, ultimately unsuccessfully, re-election. An increase in petrol prices in America ultimately would have made people feel poorer, less happy. In the end, we didn't see a direct impact. There were reports last year that Ukraine may have been willing to halt these attacks on Russian oil infrastructure if, in exchange, Russia would have halted its strikes against Ukraine's energy infrastructure. Since the first winter of the war, Moscow has been targeting Ukrainian electricity production facilities, power stations, distribution networks, and indeed its sort of hot water infrastructure, both to try and inhibit Ukrainian industry and indeed just to plunge the country into cold and darkness, try and sap and crush the morale. It's failed to do that, but nonetheless, as these strikes have continued, Ukraine's energy infrastructure really has taken a hammering. As one Western official told me, it had shuddered, but it is still standing. Nonetheless, rolling blackouts have become an increasing part of the daily reality for most people in Ukraine. While we're on the subject of energy, it's also worth noting that on New Year's Eve, so since our last Frontline update, gas transits across Ukraine have finally halted. Now, there was a pipeline, there are a number of pipelines, two main pipelines crossing Ukraine. One of those ceased to function during the course of the war. One was still operational under a 5-year contract, which expired on New Year's Eve. I mean, that's one of the sort of extraordinary things about this conflict is these two close neighbours, Ukraine and Russia, in many ways were mutually interdependent. Gas transits was one of those ways. Russia reportedly made about £4 billion a year from selling the gas which transited from Russia through Ukraine to European markets. That has now stopped. Europe has tried to wean itself off Russian gas over the course of this war. European countries saying that they were prepared for this, they knew it was coming. Indeed, there is still a second, or rather another pipeline taking Russian gas through the Black Sea, and that takes it to Turkey, Hungary and Serbia. So Russia is still able to export some natural resources to European markets, but not as much. This strike on the fuel depot in Engels, it comes as both sides have really ramped up, or appear to have ramped up their activity, and it does feel like there's been a gear shift in the last few weeks and possibly months, really as both sides are vying for advantage before Donald Trump is inaugurated as US president, because Donald Trump is in some sense a wild card. He's going to change the dynamic. Whatever happens, he's likely to change the dynamic around this conflict. We're going to talk today in our exclusive members-only video about what Trump's plans for Ukraine are. If you'd like to watch that, then do join Frontline. What we're seeing, though, on the ground is this increase in tempo. We've seen it from the Russians in Donbass, in Donetsk, where they're continuing to advance. They're fighting in Krakow. They're just a few miles from Pokrovsk. We've seen it from the Ukrainians in Kherson. Now, you remember in August, Ukraine launched a lightning assault into Russia's Kursk Oblast. They seized around 1,000 square kilometers. Now, since then, they've lost around half of that territory. At the last count, they still hold around 500 square kilometers. This is an important bargaining chip. President Zelensky has said that. America's top diplomat, Antony Blinken, has said that. Holding Russian soil will provide Ukraine with a bargaining chip if and when peace talks come. What we've seen in the last few days is Ukrainian forces have broken out from their positions. They've punched through the Russian front lines in a northeasterly direction from Sudzha, which is the main town they've captured. That's the town I was able to visit in August. It was an armoured assault. There was footage of this shared online. We saw Ukrainian vehicles charging over snow-covered fields in Kursk. The Russians claimed, but were unable to confirm, that a British Challenger 2 tank had been destroyed. You know, there was similarly dramatic footage coming from eastern Donbass, footage shared of what appeared to be a tank duel, a Russian and a Ukrainian armoured convoy meeting each other through a patch of forest and firing on each other, a reminder of the sort of intensity of these heavy armoured battles and indeed infantry battles happening over such a huge front line. Another extraordinary clip that's emerged since our last update appears to show a Ukrainian MiG-29 jet swerving to avoid a Russian missile. This tempo has increased, and what we've seen just in the last 24 hours, a deadly Russian strike on the south-central city of Zaporizhzhia, where at least 13 people have been killed and more than 100 injured, and strikes in the southern city of Kherson, where at least 7 people have been killed. As we're filming this, we've just heard that the US Secretary of State for Defense, Lloyd Austin, has announced another $500 million worth of military aid for Ukraine as allies gather at Ramstein Air Base in Germany for the Ukraine Contact Group. That's where Ukraine's allies try and coordinate their aid and support for Ukraine. Speaking there, President Volodymyr Zelensky has backed plans or proposals put forward by some NATO allies, notably France, and endorsed by senior figures in the United Kingdom, to put allied troops, Western troops, into Ukraine. He said that would be one of the best ways of deterring Russian aggression. We'll talk a little bit more about that in our next video about Donald Trump's plans. So if you'd like to watch that, do join Frontline. You can join the Frontline, but there should be a button underneath this video, or you can go to the Sun's homepage on YouTube. If you've got any questions, please do ask them in the comments below, and as always, I'll try and answer as many as we can in the next episode, either on the next video, or I'll get into the comments myself and answer them there. A lot of you asking last week how the casualty figures are calculated. We talked about NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte had said that there had been 1 million casualties from this conflict. Now, he has made that estimate based on, that is, dead and wounded from both sides. That's important to note. He wasn't saying 1 million Russians had been killed, as some of you interpreted that. He was saying that there have been 1 million casualties on both sides. That's 1 million people either dead or wounded both from Russia's armed forces and from Ukraine's. Now, where do we get these figures from? How are they calculated? They are ostensibly calculated on a daily basis by Ukrainian and Russian armed forces, who collect information about the casualties they think they've inflicted on the other side. Now, historically, in all conflicts, most armies, most armed forces tend to exaggerate the number of casualties they think they have inflicted. We don't take these figures directly from Ukrainian estimates. We tend to take them from the UK Defence Intelligence Agency, from senior British military officials, senior American military and politicians, and indeed British MPs. The last estimates from UK government officials was that Russia had suffered 750,000 casualties. Again, that's dead and wounded. The UK's Defence Intelligence Agency has been posting regular updates now about the Russian rate of losses, and we will put links to some of those publications in the notes underneath this video. So if you'd like to look at the original source material yourself, you can see that. We then took these numbers together. We marked Rutte saying 1 million casualties. We took the British estimates that Russia had lost 700 to 750,000 people dead and wounded. That left us with the figure that Ukraine had likely lost 250 to 300,000 people. The BBC have also done some excellent research, working with independent researchers and analysts, tracking funeral notices and death notices and Facebook posts inside Russia to confirm instances where soldiers have been reported as killed in action in the conflict. And their latest update suggests that some 70,000 Russian soldiers have been killed over the course of this conflict. So that is an independent second set of figures from a totally different sort of sourcing mechanism. Now, if you were to take that 70,000 confirmed killed, that would give you a roughly sort of 10 to 1 ratio, or 9 to 1 ratio of killed to wounded. Western officials have suggested actually Russia's real ratio is much higher, so far more soldiers are killed relative to wounded. But those are the best figures we've got. They're not perfect, they're the best ones we've got. Question number 2. How is North Korea getting men and munitions into Russia, and could Ukraine or its allies try and cut that supply line? North Korea has sent around 12,000 troops into Russia, and millions of artillery shells, as well as rockets and heavy weapons, including tracked artillery guns. The short answer is Russia and North Korea share a land border with a rail and road crossing. So that is how they are getting it in. Ukraine might, in an ambitious attack, be able to launch some sort of sabotage operation there. They have shown themselves capable of conducting sabotage operations thousands of miles inside Russian territory, but certainly that would not be something that Ukraine's allies could do, because that would require an attack on either sovereign North Korean or sovereign Russian soil. Final question today: what is happening to Russia's Black Sea fleet? Well, over the course of the conflict, Ukraine has had some spectacular successes attacking Russian naval vessels, both with long-range cruise missiles. We've seen the Storm Shadows hitting Alligator landing ships, a Kilo-class submarine in dry dock in Sebastopol. We've seen the headquarters of the Black Sea Fleet hit. We've also seen a number of these attacks with the sea drones, variations of, there's the Magura 5, there's the Sea Baby. These have been used to drive up to Russian vessels in the Black Sea and explode next to their hulls, doing serious damage, often sinking them. Last year, Britain said that Russia's Black Sea Fleet was functionally inactive. That was the phrase used in March by the UK Defence Secretary. We later heard from Admiral Tony Radakin, who's the chief of Britain's defence staff, saying that Russia's Black Sea Fleet had been brought to heel. The vessels have, to all intents and purposes, moved east from Sebastopol in Crimea to Novorossiysk, which is a port on the Russian mainland at the eastern end of the Black Sea. Whilst this is a significant success for Ukraine, worth also noting the assessment of Ivo Vark, I hope I'm pronouncing that name correctly. He is the head of Estonia's navy, who is saying that neither side has total control, neither side has won the war in the Black Sea. But the very fact that Ukraine, without a major navy, has been able to push Russia's forces east is a really significant victory. And of course, by doing that, They opened that corridor to get the grain exports out of the ports like Odessa by hugging the coastlines to get through the Bosphorus and into the Mediterranean. Turkey closes access to the Black Sea under an agreement called the Montreux Convention to warships of countries at times of war. So while this war in Ukraine is raging, Russia is theoretically unable, and in practice it has proven so thus far, unable to get more warships into the Black Sea. So they have lost. Russia had a major naval base in Tartus in Syria. That is now in jeopardy because of events in Syria, but they're unable to move those vessels from the Eastern Mediterranean into the Black Sea. So we may expect to see them sailing out of the Mediterranean and around Britain towards the Kola Peninsula to Murmansk if they have to try and get back to Russian waters. As ever, thank you very much for watching. If you've got any questions, please do ask them in the comments below. And if you'd like to join Frontline, then do click. There's a join button below this video, or you can go to the Sun's homepage. You'll get access to exclusive content, a badge so that we can recognize you in the comments, and exclusive emojis. Thank you very much, and look forward to seeing you next time.